If you've ever wondered, what if another studio besides Toei animated One Piece, and the director of Code Geass handled it? Well, that's sort of answered with the 98 OVA with a very to-the-point title, Defeat the Pirate Ganzack. It's also the first ever One Piece animation and was produced by the same studio behind Ghost in the Shell, Volleyball Show, Attack on Titan, kinda, as well as working on other big names like Hunter x Hunter, good old Production IG. And visually, it was excellent and very different. The art style is obviously the first thing. It's pretty interesting to see the difference in approach between the two anime's character designers. Now, firstly, I'll point out that Oda designed some of the characters for this film. However, the one who adapted them for the anime was Hisashi Kagawa. He was actually a character designer on Sailor Moon, so definitely wasn't new to this role. And then Noboru Koizumi for early One Piece. And one of the first things is the noggin. Even in early One Piece, Oda gave a rounded shape to the head. Koizumi doesn't really change it all too much, with exception to a sharper touch. However, Kagawa's designs are sharper again and have like these strong curves for the side of the head with a more longer and pointed chin. It gives a very defined look to the faces. Outside the face though, Oda's designs have either thick or very thin necks with two inwards facing curves. Ears sit down very low on the head and like the neck. The arms and legs are rounded and tube-like. And then finally, those big old feet and hands. And Koizumi brings that all over, of course.
And I know you ain't get them big ass ugly shoes. Man, come on.
Fellas.
Who did it first, man? Well, stupid. Yeah, stupid fresh.
With an addition of slightly longer jaws. And Kagawa's designs once again go in a different direction. For starters, the big hands and feet are gone, just regular human proportions now. The ears sit up just above the jaw instead of like half below it. The neck goes outwards, the lines very much follow the natural shape of it. You can like see that subtle bump for the top of the sternomastoid, which is that tube-like muscle that forms the main silhouette of the neck. And then the second part. Whereas Oda just simplifies it all into one line. And it's very much the same for the arms and clothing in that it leans to a more grounded look. A slightly realistic take on Oda's style, you could say. And there's other little details like having no hatching and going for heavier shading. And with the ear, which instantly stood out for me, the shapes are roughly the same, albeit being bigger than Oda and Koizumi. But instead of all this line in here, it's broken down into two lines. Some animators might draw it a little different than others, but it's pretty consistent. Oddly, there are a couple of times where you'll get the regular One Piece proportions, low sitting ears and big hands, but that's kinda the exception. And speaking of designs, interestingly enough, one of the animators on this special, Masayuki Sato, would later join Toei and do the character designs for the later One Piece movies and specials. Kagawa would join Toei as well, but he didn't touch One Piece till like almost about 15 years later. So yeah, there's some niche lore that's also relevant. Now in terms of writing, this film was an anime original story, but definitely recycles bits and pieces from the manga, especially in the case for the villain Ganzack. I guess he's the result if you stuck Buggy, Don Krieg and Arlong all in a blender. The Buggy aspect comes out in his attempts to destroy the town with his ship, after the townspeople rebel against him, and he also has a thing for damaging straw hats. With Arlong, you have the sea monster under his command. There's also the enslaving everyone on the island thing, and even similar dialogue like calling them livestock. The Don Kriegness comes in with his partial reliance on weapons and armor. What's kind of weird though is that this anime predates both those characters. The manga was actually only in the Syrup Village arc when this film dropped, which also explains the absence of Usopp, as he would be introduced about a month from the July release, and by that point it would have been a bit too late for rewrites. But it does raise the question, did this niche OVA inspire some of early One Piece? Well, we do know Oda had plenty of praise to throw to the anime staff and said, quote, "brings tears to my eyes, and the staff's passion lit the fires of my writing soul." So it's definitely a possibility that he borrowed some elements. At the same time, some of it probably was just coincidence, like the plot point of a little girl that, being Medaka, having a particular hatred of pirates because of what they did to her village. Obviously, the pirate hate is inspired by Nami in those earlier chapters, but at this point it hadn't been revealed that her village had also been taken over, nor had we seen her as a child. At the same time, Oda no doubt already had Nami's backstory planned out. There's like clear references to Belle Mère, for example, in the Orange Town arc, and plenty of others I'm forgetting. So yeah, some plot points just happen to already line up with the manga, and perhaps there were some aspects that did inspire Oda when it came to flesh out specific concepts or characters. Now, animation wise, this credit list is stacked with quality and quantity. First up, there's the GOAT, the man regarded as one of the greatest action animators who have broken down many of times, Yutaka Nakamura. Cowboy Bebop, Full Metal Alchemist, Mob Psycho, My Hero Academia, Dragon Ball Z that one time, Soul Eater, Evangelion, Space Dandy. You probably haven't heard of it unless you watch Scamboli's channel.
You know what makes my ball?
But it's good, is also on this special, and only contributes about 8 seconds of animation. But hey, it's cool he's here. Then there's the Studio Cockpit crew. By the way, that's where Kagawa and Sato worked for at the time. The studio behind some of the best action animation on Dragon Ball Z, and a fan favorite on Sailor Moon.
Yoink.
Specifically, there's Yoshihiko Umekoshi, well known for his work on Berserk and Precure. Certainly worlds apart, a man of diversity you could say, but most famous for being the chief animation director on My Hero Academia. Honestly, there's plenty of more names I could rattle off, although the audience attention will probably crash if I labor on any longer. Moving forward to the actual content of this special, the crew get attacked by a monster, Luffy almost commits homicide, and somehow manages to make it to shore. But when he gets there though, two pirates are ready to strip him, but not before some kid decides to go for an attempted shank. This results in Luffy getting stomped, which, must admit, is kind of funny. But then it leads to the first animated Gum Gum Punch, and by none other than Umekoshi. Interestingly, this is one of the 2 scenes that have actually been confirmed on this entire thing, as of recording. And it is great. Good anticipation going into it, there's cool details like adding headshake as Luffy's talking, makes the animation more expressive. The smoke has a smooth touch. Umekoshi times it out on 1s and 2s, with very little space between the drawings to give that smooth effect, and the impact is pretty different and unusual, in a good way. Usually when animating a punch true to life, they're quick, and in anime they're particularly snappy, and because of that you don't need a lot of drawings because your brain fills in the gaps. For this scene though, it's fairly long and uses a surprisingly high drawing count. I'll remove some of the frames to kind of like show you the standard look you would see in anime. No complaints though, overall very impactful. And cool framing for the finish. Anyway, Luffy returns with Medaka and gets island lure by the old man. And I guess this is a good a time as any to bring up the director and storyboarder, Goro Taniguchi. Now, I haven't watched Code Geass or honestly anything that he's worked on besides 2 episodes of Space Dandy.
Yes, it's the booby mobile! And then, what? Who's that? Looks like a gorilla!
In One Piece Film Red. On second thought, that isn't too bad, I guess. But suffice to say, all I knew about him before this video is that he never touched One Piece until like 20 years later with Film Red. And he's also the reason the footage on screen isn't pixelated to oblivion.
You see the ring? You see the ring? He got a beautiful ring.
And everyone isn't turned into an orange mass. As this special was his debut as a director and being One Piece related of course. For the promotion of Film Red, they decided to re-show it. Still not perfect quality, I do wish a better remaster was available, but it is what it is. With his character introduction out of the way, he does a convincing job in introducing us to the main villain. Using fire and having someone illustrated through just a rough silhouette isn't a particularly new concept, but it is effective and is executed well. We're also introduced to the Devil's Tower, certainly one of the more unique concepts story-wise, and I'm probably going to say this continually throughout this video, but the effects work. It's always fun to see how animators get creative in this area. Don't know who it is, and honestly that will also be the theme throughout much of this video, but the shapes and the level of detail are very eye-catching. Also the sound design and the directional choice for pure silence. With just this whistle of the projectile gives an eerie atmosphere. Even after it lands, there's this quiet rumble that lingers on for about a minute. It really sells it as this terrible weapon and through audio alone. Skipping a little ahead to the action, we get peak Zoro character art. The color palette is very nice as well. Again, it's interesting to look at the direction Toei took, specifically One Piece's color designer in its early days, Tsutomu Tsukuda, which was very bright and stylized. Like Zoro's hair, for example, is a vibrant green. This isn't criticism, by the way, I think it's great. It gives a very distinct and unique look. While Akiko Shibata, the designer for this anime, goes for something more earthy, and the palette overall drifts to warmer tones. It's a little closer to Oda's colours for the skin and Zoro's hair in that respect, at this time anyway. Keep in mind also the quality of the footage makes everything look a little more dark and dingy than how it would have originally looked. But yeah, the OVA goes for a more grounded approach, and that extends to every department. The direction for the background art is quite realistic. The animation, like we can see literally in the next cut as Nami makes her return on screen, is very loose and alive, and as we've gone over, the drawings lean away from Oda's very stylized art. Anyways, besides all that, Luffy finally meets the Pirate Ganzack, who just feels like a non-clown version of Buggy for me, and our first proper fight begins. And man, it is difficult to break this down without dragging on, because it's really packed with so many little details, like the animator flinging Luffy's arms around before he bounces out of the way. On the impact of the explosion, a flickering wave glass filter is added to make it feel more impactful and big. And for the main cut, there's a whole mountain of difficulty to climb for the animator. They have to work with 5 characters in a single cut. It's fairly long. Oda also hands the staff a pretty detailed design with Ganzack, so the animator is also having to keep in consideration how these massive crab claws will function in relation to the body. And on top of that, these two are constantly moving. Luffy in particular is always bouncing around. The action is definitely a bit short-lived, and it's kinda annoying we don't actually get to see Zoro fight, it just shows the aftermath, but whatever. What action there is was well done. So the crew are now all captured, except Nami, who's with Ganzack. I think it's clear by this point the scriptwriter Kitajima was kinda just grabbing all sorts of plot points from the manga, and it's around this part where animator Yasunori Miyazawa presumably comes in. Now this isn't a unique observation or something I haven't said before, but anime of the shonen kind likes to have the best animation focus on the action, while the character animation, if there is any, remains pretty plain. Ever so often you might get a team that challenges that, like with Ranking of Kings, Chainsaw Man, or just a particularly important moment, but those are exceptions. And so it makes animation like this noteworthy. It's a rarity to see so much attention paid to how the dialogue is expressed. Like as Zoro yells, every word is animated out. It's way more expressive and adds a lot of life into the scene. Luffy in particular, with his rubber-like body, is a animation playground, really gives a lot of freedom for expression. And whether this is Miyazawa or not, whoever it is really takes full advantage, twisting and bending Luffy's face in all sorts of wacky, expressive ways that just wouldn't be possible with any other character. There's also animation techniques like multiples, which is something I feel you see more in Western cartoons than anime. Works really well here though. Moving on, the villagers revolt against Ganzack and tossing dynamite around like it's Red Dead Redemption, and it's presumed Yutaka Nakamura comes in for the power-up, which obviously really good. It has all the flair needed for this moment and gets the audience thinking, okay, now it's really going to go down. And one of the ways he goes about it is this constant layering. So there's that pause when Ganzack comes back with a cape flapping in the wind, which is followed up with a quick flickering of lightning, then a massive cloud of smoke that blocks out the background, then it covers Ganzack with just a silhouette, and then finally that's blocked out as well. Like Nakamura just keeps layering element after element. Just when you think it's got to stop, he takes it up again. For me, this is what carries that excitement in his work. It's this constant elevation of energy. Now, I think with all the great aspects we've gone over regarding the visuals for this movie, it's not going to come as a shock that that quality is maintained for the final battle. So the tower the townspeople were building turns out to be a massive ship, and Ganzack uses it to begin leveling the island. I brought this up in my last video about how simple but effective size contrast is, and you can see it here. Massive explosion that fills almost half the screen, small ship. The photography effects are noteworthy as well. The blur, a subtle zoom, the wave glass filter again, and a red filter layered over the top. By themselves, there's nothing that interesting, but altogether it helps in making for a visually powerful explosion. Now with the final battle, Ganzack's arsenal makes it pretty fun, but it's so short. Like, before I gave it a pass, but everything's been leading to this, and there's less action than their first battle. At least we get to see Zoro actually fight, even if it's for only about 15 seconds. The composition of everything is strong as ever though, engaging angles with interesting framing. But then we come to Medika's death. supposedly. And I have to bring up Taniguchi's awful track placement. So a small child has been decapitated. And the visuals match the tone, a palette swap to black and white, intense angles, A+, it's great. And appropriately, silence is used, but then it's followed up with an upbeat jazz tune, like... Is this meant to be a celebration? What little goblins were prancing around the office that day that convinced him this was a good idea? Honestly, in retrospect, it's pretty humorous, but definitely broke the immersion and a lot of the well-built up tension during my first watch. Now, the final part is animated by Toru Yoshida. I would honestly be surprised if more than 5 people watching are like, hey, I've heard of him. But with an insane credit list like this, you've no doubt seen his work before. He's definitely an old school name, known more for his mecha animation more than anything, and fun fact is still around animating and returned to the series for One Piece Movie 6. Anyways, he'd been animating since the early 80s, so placing this moment in the hands of someone as experienced as him is no surprise. After that, we find out Medaka was alive the whole time, and so is Ganzack. Not for long though. The last part is surprisingly pretty limited and snappy, even a harmony cell is used, very unproduction IG-ish, and so I have a feeling it was probably one of the animators from Cockpit who did this last scene. Also, props to Taniguchi for that smooth transition. All in all, it ends on a good note. Vibrant art direction, Luffy being bullied by a kid, it's great. And this time the jazz tracks do suit. This was really a fun little special, although its short length doesn't allow for the greatest plot in the world, but it's fine. And for me, visually, it more than makes up for it. Honestly, I don't think anything comes close to being as animated as it was until One Piece Movie 4. It's really a hidden gem. But with that though, of course, thank you for watching. I did actually begin reading One Piece back in January, so probably more One Piece videos in the future when I actually begin the TV series. Also, check out the sponsor Fandom Eon to put a shirt on your back and support the channel in one go. And shout out to my patrons and Sol Binku and the High Roller class. But with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.